as Ty mentioned, is in the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, where we didn't just do cyber, we also had the physical infrastructure, emergency communications, CISA or CISA. And there I realized that I had a much greater appreciation for the cybersecurity threat, because before I was just like, I'd read in the newspapers, I would see it on TV. Even going back a few years, we didn't really hear much about cybersecurity. But once I started seeing the intelligence, every morning I get briefed on the intelligence, it really it made me realize just how acute and sophisticated and evolving the cyber threat landscape is. And that really gets to the second reason why I took this job, is because CMMC is really the first attempt at us as a sector, the defense industry sector, in partnership with the Defense Department, of actually doing something about it. At DHS, I spent a lot of time talking about cybersecurity. We didn't have any regulatory authorities. All we really could do was encourage people, especially on the prevention side, to good cyber hygiene, and we had some incident response capabilities, but we didn't have any regulatory authority other than regulating the chemical industry for physical security standards. But this is the first time at CMMC that the government is actually asking industry, we need you to change the way you do business for the good of our warfighters. And this really is the battlefield of the 21st century. And this is just getting started. When you think about cybersecurity, you think about managing digital risk. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to recognize that the world has changed fundamentally in terms of not only how the department and the military services operate, but how society operates. And digital risk, cybersecurity, vulnerabilities through information networks are going to be the most compelling security challenge for this nation for the rest of the century. And as more and more goes into information networks, more and more data is out there, the advent of 5G, autonomous vehicles, even in civilian life, there is no turning back. This really is a fundamental moment where we used to be an agrarian nation, and then we were an industrial nation. Well, now we really are an information technology nation. And it's because of that the department recognized that how we were doing business before with our partners in the DIB is no longer tenable. It's no longer viable for our national security. So I want to touch a bit on that threat landscape, because I do think it's important for all of you to appreciate that this isn't just something that bureaucrats in Washington came up with because that's what they like to do, is come up with new programs. It really is based on that cyber threat landscape that most Americans like me now don't have access to the intelligence, but I would tell you the threat actors who every day are looking to hack into our system, both the government and private sector, to steal information, steal our money, jack our infrastructure. Every day it's happening. It's happening not only from those four nation-state actors of China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. It's also from these global syndicates. And obviously, the last 6 months from Colonial Pipeline, Microsoft Exchange, SolarWinds, I think we probably all have a better appreciation for it. But when you think about those bad outcomes, it's almost like a maturity model of bad cyber crime. On the low end, we have basic hacking or hacktivists who like to almost do it for sport, and oftentimes they're not really creating any damage. They're just doing it to make a political point or to snoop around, and we don't spend too much time worrying about that. And then as you go up, we've got cyber vandalism and people deface websites, and that's not good. But then we don't really lose a whole lot of sleep over that. But then you start getting into people who want to steal money, ransomware. And I can tell you, when I first entered the DHS, it was a tough time getting anyone to pay attention to ransomware in terms of a national priority. And now look where we are. So that threat continues to evolve, and the theft of our money through locking up our networks is a menace in modern society. So that's not good. And then you get into the theft of personal identifiable information, or PII. There's a huge privacy vulnerability in cyberspace right now, and it's generally coming from China, who is looking they're building a global database of who's who and who works with who and where people travel that would make Orwellian themes seem like the minor leagues in terms of what China's trying to do. And it's for the preservation of their political regime of the Communist Party. When they break into OPM and steal all that PII, when they hack into Marriott, they're not looking to steal rewards points for weekends in Lauderdale. They're looking to get names and phone numbers and addresses and social security numbers. So that's on the privacy side. But then you get into the theft of intellectual property. And that's when we're really talking about probably the most acute driver for CMMC, is that they recognize that it's very difficult to hack into the DOD, the information network. They're very difficult to hack into military networks. Let's go for the weakest link. We've got all these hundreds of thousands of companies that support the Department of Defense. Let's go after them. They're probably suspecting. I don't think they have that sensitive information, but you know what? We are going to use that information to reverse engineer and to learn and to grow, because we have a plan that we published in 2015 called Built in China 2025. And by 2025, we want to dominate 10 industries globally. It's no longer that we want to just fortify our own communist security over our. We want to dominate the global market in 10 industries. When you look at those, and this was publicly announced in 2015, look at those 10 industries: IT, robotics, aerospace, maritime engineering, rail, power, and then you get into like green energy, agriculture, and medicine. But but 7 of those 10 are right in line of what you all do in supporting the Department of Defense in probably most cases. And so they have told us that we are going to dominate these 10 industries, in addition to obviously always looking as a strategic competitor how their war game can take us on in the military realm. And so they used information network vulnerabilities to steal intellectual property, even if it's unclassified, even if it's federal contract information, FCI, controlled unclassified information, CUI. That is what they're going after, and that is, when you think about CMMC, that is what we're trying to stop. I can also talk a bit about sabotaging critical infrastructure. That's kind of more Russia plays and some of the other bad actors that are on. But since this is a DIB audience, I won't get into civilian critical infrastructure. But those are all the bad outcomes that threat landscape is targeting every hour of every day of every year, and will be so in the future. And so, we often used to say at CISA, my former agency, what do we know, what are we going to do about it? So if you just stipulate that what I just told you about the threat landscape is true, just work with me, then we have to ask ourselves the question, well, what are we going to do about it? And coming back to why I think CMMC is such a pivot point is that this is the first time where we're actually going to say, we're not going to just say we're doing cybersecurity, we're actually going to verify that we're doing it, because there's simply too much at stake. When you think about when the NIST 800-171 practice was put into place, even then, right, it's a self-attestation. And if you're doing a DoD contract, or a government contract, all those terms and conditions in the back of the contract, I pay my taxes, I do E-Verify, I do cybersecurity. And then once DoD starts spot checking that, recognize that most companies weren't really taking it seriously enough. Yes, many were. Certainly there are many who were following those guidelines and implementing those practices. But many were probably, whether it was the DoD account executive of the company or the COO, or would turn to their friend. Hey, we've got a CISA, right? We're doing cybersecurity, right? Yeah, we're doing this, right? And then off they go. So those days are over, right? And so what's important to recognize is that if you're in the market of providing support to the Department of Defense, market conditions have changed. And like any great market conditions changing, business needs to be agile and to adapt. And then that's the first point I would talk about in terms of how to think about CMMC. That doesn't mean that this is going to be easy. It's a non-trivial challenge, and so in terms of the threat, and so it's implementing CMMC is non-trivial. It's not impossible. It's probably not as hard as you think it is. But if you're a DIB company who's never really thought about cybersecurity before, use this. Good on you for being here, but recognize that there's no turning back. There's going to be, and I'll talk more about where we are with DoD. And I should have said on the outset, as Ty said, I do not represent the Department of Defense. I'll talk a little bit about who we are in a second, but nothing I say or have said is representative of the Pentagon. But there's no turning back. And so if I'm a DIB company, if I'm what we call an organization seeking certification, how should I think about this journey? I think this conference subtitle is the CMMC journey. If I haven't started, how do I even think about getting started? And first off, it is, I think, important to understand the basics of the ecosystem. We talk about the CMMC ecosystem. So let me just spend a few minutes talking about who's who, the Zoom, what we do. So the Pentagon runs this program. They're the policy makers. We certainly have opportunities to try to advise them, and we meet with them regularly literally several times a week, but make no mistake, I'm not driving the CMMC policy. I like to think I have some input as they deliberate, but they own this program. There is talk about CMMC expanding out into the civilian executive branch, so Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, or Interior. That all may come. That's probably more of a GAO, OMB discussion than it is any one department. There's international interest. I can tell you that there have been a number of companies that want to go ahead and ascend or adopt the CMMC standard for their own military industry base. But for right now, this is the DoD program and the DoD standard. We are the accreditation body. So as Ty said, we are an independent, Maryland-based, not-for-profit corporation that is the exclusive partner of DoD. We have there's a no-bid contract, but also a no-cost contract, so they don't pay us any money. We get our revenue through the fees and application fees that we charge the ecosystem that's coming together to implement CMMC. And so we have a few basic functions. A lot of people don't know what accreditation. People throw around the terminology. What's accreditation versus certification versus authorization? And so accreditation in a formal sense is that we are going to be accrediting those third-party organizations, those CMMC third-party organizations. We call them the C3POs. They're the ones who actually conduct the assessments of DIB companies. Again, we call those DIB companies OSCs, organizations seeking certifications. They're not all incorporated entities, some are nonprofits, but essentially those C3PAOs are going to be visiting and working with you if you're a defense contractor. We accredit them. We accredit them to meeting ISO standards. This is the ISO, the International Standards Organization, making sure that as a conformance assessment entity, which is what they are, that they are following international recognized standards and processes to conduct those assessments. So that if you're a defense contractor and you're paying for an assessment, that you should know that when that team shows up to do your assessment, that they're accredited, that they're following the rules, that they're trained, that they're certified, their individuals are certified. That's what we do. So we credit those companies, and then the individuals who work for those companies, the assessors and individuals, we also make sure that they are trained, they've successfully passed the exam, and we certify them. So we have an accreditation role with those C3POs, a certification role for the assessors and the instructors, and then we also kind of oversee the ecosystem in the marketplace. And by the marketplace, I mean the place where we bring together DIB companies with C3POs. C3POs are looking to hire assessors, instructors who are looking to work with the trainers. So there's a licensed training provider. I don't want to throw too many acronyms out, but those are going to be teaching CMMC courses to create more assessors. Are called licensed training providers. They get their content from licensed publishing partners who are actually educational firms who develop the material. So there's a whole ecosystem of individuals. And just as importantly, there's a consulting part of the ecosystem. RPs and RPOs, these are registered practitioners and registered provider organizations. These are the coaches and the trainers. This is the help, and I'll come back to them later. They're a really important part. Some of you maybe I know some of you are RPs and RPOs, and they're the ones that really are designed to work with defense contractors and those two companies to understand how to get started, what to do, how to better understand all the technical mumbo jumbo that resides within the CMMC model, because it does get, when you get to level 3, we're talking over 100 practices across 17 domains. I do not think it is overly challenging in technical nature, but just from an implementation and organization, it really behooves you to get help from people. And so those RPs and RPOs, while we don't accredit them or certify them, they are registered, and they are much more authoritative than some consultant who just calls you up and says, hey, let me talk about CMMC. If they don't show the credential that they've gone through our class and they've taken, it's not an exam, it's essentially a test, but we do background checks, and we kick the tires, making sure that these are credible individuals and credible companies who are out there to serve as your trainers, advisors, consultants, and coaches. And so that's an important part of the ecosystem. So that's what we do. But another part, informally, is we're helping DoD implement this, and since they've been into an internal conclave deliberating the future in terms of the implementation improvements, we're the ones that have been doing most of the speaking since April. I'll come back to kind of where we are on that, but I do want to get back to in terms of what should you do if you're a defense contractor. You've heard about CMMC, you're starting to learn about it, and you're wondering how to get started. The first thing I would tell everyone is, before you even jump into CMMC, if you're an account, you're the DoD account rep or the program manager, or if you're not on the IT or the InfoSec side of your company, start learning about your own company's environment, your data environment. Talk to your CISO, figure out who that is, or your CIO, or the gal who does IT. If you're the CEO, the COO, the CF, it doesn't matter. If you're in any position of influence with regard to how your company interacts with the Department of Defense, your new best friend is that CISO or that InfoSec manager, that IT systems manager. Because before you can even understand CMMC, you need to understand your own environment. And we had this problem with federal agencies. You saw this when SolarWinds hit. People didn't know they were running SolarWinds. They're very basic questions you should ask your IT folks. Okay, how big is our network? What's in our own servers? What's in the cloud? Who's our cloud provider? Who has access? How many endpoints are there in our network? Who's on our network? What's on our network? What are they doing? You don't have to get into all the technical mumbo jumbo to have a basic understanding of a concept of operations on how your company's data environment has been configured and how it operates. So that's my first advice. Just get a basic understanding of how you operate, and especially how you handle government information. That CUI, that FCI. Where is it? Who has access to it? Ask your IT person. Show me where we keep it. Who has that? What do we have in place right now? Do we have any kind of cyber hygiene practices? Are we still Wild West where no one really is doing the basics? I hope that's not the case. I hope everyone is on their own volition doing this. Because if you think about it, if you were your data is what you're protecting here, and in this case, it's the government data. So you have your most important customer, the Department of Defense, telling you that got these threats. This is what they're after. You hold this information. You support us. I need you. This is important to us. That data is important to us. I need you to do a better job protecting it. And it's not unlike if you were in the jewelry business. They had a whole chain of high-end jewelry stores where you're selling diamonds and gold and high-end watches. I think your security guy is going to be an important person. Like, okay, are we using cameras? Who are we hiring as the guards at the front door? Are we locking the jewelry up at night in the safe? Who's got the combination of the safe? Because that is the business that they are in, and protecting their jewelry. So security is probably first and foremost for those companies. That's how you need to think about it. If you're a DIB company, if you're a defense contractor, your data is very important to the department. And so just having that internal conversation about how we configure our network, where is the data stored, how do we handle it, that's the first step. Have that internal conversation. And then when you've done that, I would encourage you to then start learning about CMMC. Talk to a registered practitioner or an RPO. So an RPO is an individual. The RPO is a company. Every company who's an RPO has to have at least one registered practitioner working there. Talk to them. Just get the conversation started. Understand the domains. There are 17 domains. It's not, again, we're not asking, the Department of Defense is not asking you to invest in quantum computing. This is access control. It's auditing your logs. It's awareness and training. Are you training your workforce about spear phishing and things like that? I joke, I like to say, it used to be the worst thing an employee could do in your company is to jam a copier or spill coffee on a laptop or do something stupid at a Christmas party. Now, with one keystroke, any employee can jack up your entire network, lock up your data, or let someone steal it. So you have to have a training program for cybersecurity. Do that. How are you configured? Configuration management is the domain. Personnel security, traditional personnel security, NISPON, a lot of good stuff. That's in play. It's the response. You have a plan on how to respond if something happens. Media protection. You have a bunch of thumb drives laying around the CUI. These are the kind of things that CMMC is about, right? It's not about algorithms and all sorts of modern advanced computer science. It is basic blocking and tackling of how you're protecting your environment. And starting with a plan, a system security plan, SSP, is kind of the first step, and those RPs and RPOs can get you started. So as you learn about what's in your environment, you can start better understanding what CMMC is trying to accomplish. And so there's the DoD's got the guides out there. You can read the models and get into all the different steps of maturity, the 5 tiers, and learn about that. But really, it's understanding those 17 domains. These are the areas that you need to have some procedures. You got to document them, and you got to show that you're taking these practices and implementing them in your organization. So that's 2, once you learn about CMMC. And then 3, start the planning process. It is never too early to invest in cybersecurity. I know many companies are going to wait for the final mandate to come in, meaning I'm a defense contractor, I've been making bolts for Navy ships since 1943, and I'm not going to do CMMC until they make me do it. Everyone's got their own business decision. I'll come back to what I said before. This isn't going away. And your company, regardless of the DoD data, is targeted for other reasons, like I said. Either to lock you up for ransomware, to steal the PII. It is never too early to start planning for cybersecurity. That's what I encourage you to do. Figure out what your resources are, what your timelines are, and no one's asking you to do this overnight. No one's saying that you must have all of these level 3 practices implemented tomorrow. It really is designed to fit to where you are as a company, what you do, how much CUI or FCI you hold. And some companies, like the Boeings and Lockheeds, are going to have to get to level 5. And there are some companies that only need to do level 1. And level 1 is really nothing. I mean, I say nothing because it's just the very basics. It's like, I implore you, if you're not doing it, you should do this on your own. So I don't want to hear any whining about 1. 3, you're getting some serious, documentation and maturity, and that's why it's a maturity model. But start playing, figuring out, because I'll hit on this and then I'll give an update and I'll stop for questions. But I have talked about cost, and not that I'm trying to avoid it. I want to spend some time on how to think about cost. Because, as I said, it's a non-trivial challenge. It's going to be a non-trivial cost. And again, when you plan now for when you're going to start implementing CMMC, you're going to have better control over your spending. You're not going to have to take it all on, from high in 1 year. You can build out towards this. And once you're there, I do think that the out-year recertifying is not going to be that big a lift because you're going to have your act together, everything's going to be in place. So there is going to be an upfront investment of your own internal manpower. This is something that someone's got to have, tagged to do it, more than one, most certainly. But this is not something that can necessarily be just a collateral duty for the IT guy to do. This is it's a cultural change, and the DoD, when I talk about that, it's like this is a conformance regime. We need to conform, but what we're really asking you to do is change the culture on how your organization operates, how it thinks about data, digital risk and data security, and how it implements that. And so when you think about cost, right now there is no market dynamic. There has been some estimates out there. I don't ask the C3POs what their pricing are. There's 4 authorized C3POs in the marketplace. We have not yet authorized them to begin assessments because the department is still working through EMAS, which is the information network of record with the DoD. It's a government network. That's what we're going to be using to store all the assessment data. That's not quite ready for use. We're close, but there's some administrative filings that will occur. Finishing up the documentation, so the assessment process, with the CAP, the scoping appendix, which is going to help assessors figure out how to scope an assessment, dispute resolution process. A few of those, the documentation is being finalized. So we haven't authorized those companies to actually start assessing. But those 4 have gone through their own CMMC level 3 assessment that DoD does through the DIPCAC. But when so as they're open for business. So companies have been contacting them to go ahead and get started. Even though there's no pilot contracts, even though right now there's no requirement yet to implement CMMC if you're a defense contractor, a lot of companies recognize that, 1, I need to invest in cybersecurity. I read the newspaper, I'm seeing what's happening, I don't want to get hit. This is going to help me protect myself. And 2, there's probably a market advantage to be able to say, hey, here's on your website, I'm CMMC certified. Look there. If I'm a government contract officer or a program manager, and I see that a company is already leaning forward and got this done, being a former, to get involved in contracts, but I can just know that when you're looking, when the government looks for support, trust is a big part of that. And this is one aspect of the trust factor. So I think we've already had over 300 companies who are actively engaged to try to get assessments scheduled. That's 300 plus against 4 C3POs. There are couple 100,000 companies in the defense industrial base, is what I'm being told. So but this again, we're still in the crawl, walk, run. My point is that as more and more C3POs get into the marketplace, that will be more competition, drive that cost down. And we're looking to stand up. Our website's terrible right now. We're getting ready to launch a new one. It was one of the first things when I took the job. Like, this is good. got to fix this. So make it much more user-friendly, much more informative. We're going to try to have like a true car functionality where if you're a defense contractor, you get an intake form, I'm in North Canton, I do this, I've got this many employees, I want a level 3 assessment, I want it next February, click. And then that's going to go to the C3POs, will come back, not instantaneously like automobile dealerships might, but come back to you pretty quickly and say, hey, here's an initial estimate. We want to drive costs down by getting more competition. But the best way to drive costs down, and this gets to the planning factor, is an assessment is generally, it's a man-hour drill, right? And obviously it takes money to implement CMMC practices within your company. I get that. It's going to take money to actually hire the C3PO to do the assessment. It's going to take money to hire the RPOs to help you get ready for those assessments. But in the assessment itself, the better organized you are, if you've got your configuration, your environment defined and bounded, and you've got your CUI organized, you've got your documentation ready to go, it's not going to take nearly as long to do that assessment than it will be if a company comes in, a C3PO, and you got stuff everywhere, it's not intuitive on your policies, your procedures, you're disorganized. And so that planning piece, even if you don't think you're going to want to get certified until next year, whatever, like, get the planning started. Start migrating towards these standards, and you're going to be in great shape when you do get that assessment. That it's not going to really take as long, and therefore, what could be a 5-day assessment is only a 2.5-day assessment, and that will drive costs down. I do know that the cost is something that the internal review is looking at until I finish, which is kind of updated where DoD is as far as I know, because even though I say I meet with them each week, I am not part of the inner sanctum that is deliberating on how to improve CMMC. As the new Biden administration came in earlier this year, they looked at CMMC and said, okay, got it. I think we might want to change some things. We want to improve how this is implemented. And if you listen to Deputy Assistant Secretary Ben Salazar, who testified today, he talked about CMMC is moving forward, but we want to improve it. And so we're going to take some time in DoD to internally deliberate on how we can improve, one, the cost burden, right? So looking at how do we ease the cost burden, especially for small and mid-sized businesses. So they'll be speaking to that here later this fall. How can we make the standard more accessible and more clarified? So issues of non-duplication or reciprocity, right? So maybe you already have FedRAMP comes into play, ISO 27001, you've already had a DoD NIST 800-171 assessment. Do you get credit for that? So DoD needs a better job of explaining where the reciprocity is going to reside. How do we scale? I've got 4 C3PAOs. There are over 450 in line waiting to get approved by DoD to enter the market as C3PAOs. So how are we going to scale that? On the training, on the assessor side, the individuals, that's our problem, and we've got a whole network, as I said, almost 70 trainers nationwide will be offering the classes for assessors. We've got Scantron ready to give the exams nationwide. We've got 20 publishers ready to print or develop and publish the educational curriculum. So I think we've got a good scalable solution on the individuals. We need a scalable solution on getting more C3POs into the marketplace. And then finally, how do we instill more trust and confidence in the ecosystem? That's something I frankly think the accreditation body plays into, because we got to make sure that when it comes to conflict of interest and ethics and making sure that everything is impartial, that we are driving that, we are overseeing this ecosystem. That is one where there is a code of conduct, the CMMC Code of Professional Conduct. We got to make sure it's being enforced and understood. And so that's the area that we can work with DoD to shore up. And some of you saw some recent town halls I've spoken a couple times now on our role with regard to conflict of interest, making sure that when you invest your time and money and resources into CMMC, that you know you're getting a fair shake. You know that there's some other companies getting a better deal. There's no bias in the system. It's an impartial conformance assessment regime. So we expect DoD, we're looking for the proverbial white smoke coming out of the Pentagon to signal that they finished with their internal conclave. And no one is more interested to know what some of these implementation improvements are going to be than I, given our role. But I do know that while that's been going on, we've been working with the ecosystem to try to get this up and running, because it's always been billed as a phase implementation. This is not a switch that's turning on tomorrow. Everyone's got to be CMMC conformed. It's a 5-year implementation, and it's going to change. We're in a provisional period, but if you get certified now, that certification is as good as you got in 3 years from now. It's, even though the rules might change. Some things may get more rigorous, some things may get more lenient. I don't know. But we're looking to get these assessments started and get this thing moving, because you guys have been patient, and I know those of you who've been engaged in CMMC are are really eager to get this thing moving. And those of you who are just learning about it probably going, well, that's fine, because I need more time to figure this all out. But I really appreciate you being here, because just by attending shows me that you're thinking about it. And I'm going to stop there so I have at least 10 minutes to answer some questions. So thanks, Canton, Akron, North Canton, for having me. And as we used to say at my last job at DHS, defend today, secure tomorrow. Meaning every day there's people trying to jack up our networks, but there's also the long game that we got to play. That's securing tomorrow. We got to make those investments in time and energy to secure our networks and manage our digital risk for the sake of our warfighters, for the sake really of the entire nation. So with that, I will stop there. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions. And Ty, if you do hands up or facilitate, we'll start right here.
So the inspections you get with the certifications and stuff, should we expect them to be similar to like a DCSA inspection as they start coming out in those type of inspection cycles?
So you're talking about the assessments, right? So CMMC Assessment. So the assessments, essentially the way the procedure goes. If you're a defense contractor and you're ready to kind of get your assessment scheduled, you're going to contact one of the C3POs. You can go to our website, you'll see in the marketplace who's available, and that's a discussion between you and the C3PO. Again, you'll tell them what you're looking for, what level, when, and they'll have initial conversations, and they'll ask you questions about your environment, and then they will essentially scope that out and quote you a price. We think we can give you a level 3 assessment for this. You say too much or no thanks, and you move on to the next one, or you say great, and you move forward. And then there's going to be a readiness review. So then the assessment process starts. There's a kickoff meeting, and then you quickly get into the readiness review. And that's really where they're saying, okay, before we actually come out and visit you, why don't you send us all your documents? And frankly, right now, with COVID, virtual assessments, frankly, have been occurring. And on a doctrinal level, we're looking to see if that's something that's going to be made permanent. And again, that would reduce costs. We can do this all virtual. I think some practice areas you kind of need eyes to see things, and eyes more than just looking at a Zoom screen. And so those assessments start with readiness review, and then you get into those practice areas, and you're looking for objective evidence either through interviews or documentation or demonstration that those practices are implemented. And there's not a numerical score. Essentially, it's a met, not met. You either met the standards, you have it, and then if you have, you'll get your badge. They'll say that you're certified. Hope that answers the question.
So a follow-on question with that, you said as you get certified, if you get certified now, let's say level 3, and the rules do change to a higher assessment, to where some of those assessments, some of those rules are more stringent for the level 3, do you have to have those implemented right away as soon as they're assessed, or before the next assessment?
Excellent question. I actually had this conversation with the DoD yesterday, because since they haven't announced what's changing, but they're getting ready to, I think, here in the coming weeks or month to signal here's the direction we're looking at. They recognize that they'll need to make a statement in terms of those companies that get, because some of these changes will go back into rulemaking. So the whole federal rulemaking process can take a year, right? So some of these changes might take a year to actually be in effect, and so they'll need to come out with a statement saying yes, that essentially guaranteeing that the assessments you do now are valid even if the rules change. Because that's how it's designed. In a provisional phase, we recognize this is a journey of discovery. And so there are going to be some things that sounded great when we were in a room writing it, but in practice, this doesn't necessarily do much for us anymore. So staying agile, staying flexible, something I try to preach, but obviously the government owes you the certainty that you're going to invest the time to get assessed now, then that should carry the same weight as it were if some of the rules are tweaked. Other questions? In the back, sir.
Have you heard about the couple leadership openings in acquisition, like part of the key decision making? Have you heard of those are going to get filled soon?
Yes. So no inside baseball. That was public announcement just last week. So Mr. Sherman, John Sherman, has been nominated to be the Chief Information Officer of DoD. He's a career civil official that was nominated just last week. He's got to go through the confirmation process. There's a vacancy, and not to get too Washington speak, but essentially the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment oversees CMMC. That is a vacant position. The CIO is vacant, but there's a nominee, and right now it's underneath the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Security, Mr. Jesse Salazar. Ultimately, it's the Deputy Secretary of Defense who's going to be making the decisions on this, and that's Kathleen Hicks. And I know that some of the draft recommendations on the implementation improvements are working their way through the building to senior officials, and so again, they are getting close to being able to show something. But to your point, other than Mr. Sherman as the nominee for CIO, I don't know who's going to be the Undersecretary of Acquisition. Sorry.
If I'm an organization seeking certification, before I bid on or on a contract, do I need to have all my subcontractors certified for that?
So, great question. There are no pilot contracts yet, so I don't have any factual basis to say this is how they're going to do it. But how it's been communicated is that when there is a pilot contract meeting, if you want to bid on this acquisition, this is going to be a CMMC level 3 procurement, so therefore the prime and the subs will need to have CMMC level 3. So the answer is, as designed, yes, but since we haven't seen any pilot contracts, I don't know if there's wiggle room in how any contract officer might be able to write the procurements, but that's generally the understanding is that it's the prime and the subs that have to have that level certification for the contracts CMMC level requirement. So,
I just wanted to follow up on that. It is, if I understand correctly, it is possible. Oh, thank you. So a prime could set up a walled garden at subs, so the subs don't have to have a full CMMC 3 level. Is that still correct, or has that changed?
I didn't hear the first part. A
walled garden, basically where the CUI is contained, can be put into an isolated place in an organization. The subs can still provide services within that isolated position. Is that still acceptable?
If you don't have CUI, right, if there's no access or handling of CUI, then that's out of scope for an assessment, right? And so it's one of the reasons why the particulars matter, and every kind of case is different in terms of how the prime and the sub, how it's arranged, who's actually got CUI. But this, again, the basic tenet of CMMC is to protect CUI and FCI. And so if you're a subcontractor that's providing clerical services to a prime and have no CUI or FCI, then my understanding how these were written is that those companies are not in scope. But we're still waiting for the scoping appendix to be released, so anything I'd say is still speculative. One more, but I think we're about out of time. The last one in the back, yes, sir.
Could you do a quick summary of the levels, just real quick, for those of us that might be unfamiliar?
Sure. 5 levels to the maturity model. The first one is level 1. It's very basic cyber hygiene. Only 20 practices from the NIST 800-171. You're talking very basic access control. If you look at it, it's just 20 things you got to do. 2 is kind of the transition. That's when we start getting into maturity, where you're documenting policies and procedures. But really, 2 is kind of odd duck, because no one's really talked about doing level 2 assessments. It's really kind of a transition level for your own kind of tracking and maturity. But 3 is kind of where it all comes together. That's where you get 122 practices in play that, and we're thinking that's where a lot of the activity is going to be. And again, that's not non-trivial to implement those, but again, if you look at those 17 domains and all those practices, that's level 3. And so that's probably where most of the conversation is, because that's what really requires more investment. The thought is you could do a level 1 assessment with like 1 assessor in 1 or 2 days. So the cost of a level 1 really shouldn't be that burdensome. But level 3, we're getting into some, this is a real assessment. 4 and 5 are kind of under construction in that there's still some work for NIST to do, and that's when you're getting into like real, protecting against nation-state threats. And there's the standard itself isn't quite finalized for 4 and 5. And when you think about 4 and 5, you're thinking about the Boeing's, Lockheed's, the Raytheons that are likely there. And so those aren't even in play yet. We don't have any curriculum to train assessors at level 5. And as I understand correctly, unless I miss it, the NIST is still finalizing the 4 and 5 standard. So it's really 1, 2, and 3. 2 is not really a level you're going to get assessed on for everything that we're seeing and thinking. It's either going to be 1 or 3. The very basic 20 practices or the level 3.
So what you've been talking about mostly is just level 3.
Mostly, because that's really the investment. That's where there's work to be done to get to level 3. It's not, you can't roll out of bed, write a couple of Word documents, put it in a binder, and say you're there. Not that you do that for one, but I'm just saying it's a cultural change, and it's a real deal.
We have time for one more.
One more, okay. Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, just a real quick question. Are you aware of any other federal funds that are available for manufacturers which might be using this, for a little boost or assistance?
Yeah, Rick, very good question. This is still evolving. There's nothing in place yet, but especially on Congress, I know there's talk about grant programs. When you think about post 9/11, all of the grant programs, the Homeland Security grant programs that go through FEMA, there are a lot of them trying to help state, local, tribal, territorial, build capacity to make it 9/11. And I think you make the case that in light of so with all the compromises we've seen, this is a similar moment that we need to invest in. That we've tried to look to see if there's a role we can play, and either as some of the it's nonprofit, if this all comes and we get the volume of activity, then we should have some resources, whether we can use renewable loans or issue our own grants. We can certainly accept donations once we get our final IRS status as a nonprofit, and I know there are major companies who are looking to make donations to help the DIV with CMMC. So I think there will be more to hear on that. Right now, I'm not aware of it.
I also believe you're allowed to pass through some of the fees.
Yes.
Contract.
Yeah, it's a great point. That I think one of the things DoD is looking at in this internal review is do we make the rules in terms of allowable costs a little more accessible or generous, so that DIV companies can. There's one thing they kind of computed into your G&A, it's another thing to actually have it directly reimbursable. And so I think that's a discussion that's happening. Okay, I know we've got a lot of great discussions we had the rest of the day. I'm going to stay here